I was thinking about the world that was and my place within it. I remember when I was growing up, things were formal or things were casual. And it really was easy to understand what to do. Casual was inside the house, formal was anything outside the house. And it really manifested in pretty much everything that we did. So when I was at home, I could wear my play clothes and my casual clothes. When I had to go to school, I had a school uniform to wear. And if I had gym class, I had a gym uniform I needed to wear. And if we were going out to a party or to a restaurant, then I had my party clothes and my formal clothes because we're going out. And the party clothes, I would have a dress. I did not have any fancy formal pants because that was not something that's casual. So I would have a dress, and the dress would have a crinoline. And I always loved the sound of the crinoline. And when I walked, the crinoline would make sound. And I was always wearing party shoes, and party shoes were always shiny. So it was very easy to know the formal, the casual, how does all of that look, and how do I actually express in that way? And it really made perfect sense. It also moved into the way that we talk to each other and the way I was taught to refer to people. So anyone older had a title. I never even knew if they had a first name. I certainly wasn't going to use their first name, but they always had a title. So a man would be Mr., and a woman would be either Mrs. or Miss. And it would designate whether that woman was available or not, whether she was married or not. Nobody used Ms., MS, because that was just too radical. That was something that was coming into the world when I was younger, and it was something that everyone always looked at as feminists. Feminists would say Ms., and if they corrected you or introduced themselves as Ms., then you know, oh, feminists. And feminists would take us to thinking about women who got together and burned their bras, because women would get together and burn their bras, except no, they didn't, because when we look historically at that first gathering of feminist radical women who were going to do that, actually, they couldn't get a permit to light a fire in public. So they weren't burning anything. They showed up with scissors. And so it wasn't a bra burning event, it was a scissor cutting bra event. But nobody ever looks at it that way. We all hear about women who burned their bras because that's, of course, revisionist history. So now we look at revisionist history and the fact that history is going to tell us what should have happened or what we think would have been a better happening, a better way this could have happened, a more powerful way this could have happened. But we're not really looking at what actually happened, because what actually happened means they couldn't get a permit. And not getting a permit is not, of course, going to be very meaningful to us, and it's not going to speak of great success. But I digress. Back to the world that was. The world that was, and whenever we would go on a trip, family trip, we would take an airplane, I would dress in my party clothes, crinoline, shiny shoes, and my brothers would be dressed really nicely, and we would go straight onto the plane because there was no security. And so you just literally walk right onto the plane, and you sit on the plane quietly with your hands in your lap as the plane is taking you where you need to go. And if you're a little boy, then you could very well be invited up to the cockpit. And you would stand there, and they would show you, as a little boy, here's the cockpit, there's the captain, there's the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator. Of course, they're all men, because there's no woman in the cockpit, and if you're a little girl, you're not invited to the cockpit, because why would you? There's no woman there, so what is it you would be interested in seeing? And so it's only men in the cockpit and little boys. My brothers would always be invited to the cockpit, which of course leads me to think, I want to talk to the person who named it that. Who named it that? Because when you name it that, then of course women aren't going to be there, and little girls are not going to be invited into the cockpit at an airplane. And I digress. Back to the old world. When I look at the old world and the changes of the old world changed in 9/11. And it's not going back. It changed. Everything about airports and airplanes changed. Everything about the world changed. And then we got used to the new world, which then became the old world because of COVID-19. So COVID-19 changed things again, and then I'm sitting there thinking, well, maybe it's about the ones and the nines, because 9/11, and then you reverse that, and you've got COVID-19, so maybe there's something about the ones and the nines, maybe there's something about 19, but Judaism really focuses big on 18. 19? Not so much. So I don't really have too much to ground myself in there with 19. And what I've just shared with you is the stuff in my head. It's the few minutes of the stuff in my head. What goes on in our heads when we look at the things around us and we imagine all the stuff in our heads. And then, of course, we're back to welcome to the book of Deuteronomy. Welcome to Dvarim. It's the stuff in Moses' head. And it's going to move, and it's going to move fast, and it's going to talk about the world that was, and it's going to talk about the world that could be, and it's going to talk about what was left behind, and it's going to talk about where you could go, and then at times it's going to sit there and say, oy vey. It's going to sit there and say, oh, God, this was terrible when that happened. But then, of course, that happened. Our minds move. They move fast. And within a few verses of listening to what's going on in Moses' head, we're struck with one word he says. He uses the word echa. He uses the word how. And we're struck by it because it is always read as we are approaching Tisha B'Av. And the book of Tisha B'Av is the book of Lamentations, which starts with the word echa, and in Hebrew, that's the name of the book. And suddenly now we're hearing two echas. We're hearing the one Moses is asking, and we're hearing the one the prophet Jeremiah is asking. And of course, we're going to have to look at both of those and say, are they speaking to each other? What's going on with the intersection of that word? When we look in the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah says, how did this happen? How did Jerusalem become so desolate? How did we let this happen? And it's this haunting, almost accusing question. How? How on earth did that happen? And when we listen to Moses using the word, he remembers turning to God and saying, how will I bear these people? How is that going to happen? And it's an interesting way to look at the two echa questions that are being asked. Jeremiah looks and says, how did the world change like this? How did it become so desolate? And we hear that question, and we know to look at the world around us and ask ourselves, do I recognize what I see? What is the world I'm currently in? And if I say to myself, I don't recognize this anymore. I don't know that there's room for my voice here. I don't know what's going on. The world has changed so radically. I don't have my footing. And at that moment, Jeremiah says, ask how. How did that happen? Don't just lose yourself and don't accept silence. Ask how. But Moses asks a different question, and Moses says, not the world, you. How can I bear you? It's not about the world, it's about my fellow human being. When I look at my fellow human being, how do I bear you? And actually, when we know Moses is asking that question, it's a really authentic and true question, because this man was raised in royalty. He was raised in a palace. He was groomed to be a king. And now he's giving a nation of people who honestly are incompetent. They're slaves. They don't know how to do the basic things. So let alone ruling an empire, he was given these people. He turns to God and says, how do I bear that? How do I bear them? And what they're about. And that becomes the second echa. The question we ask each other, when we turn to each other, do we then say, how do I bear you? And the question of bearing has very interesting layers to it, because literally it means carry you. But when we say I can't bear it, it really means no, too much. No, I don't want to bear that. When we look at each other and we hear someone else is asking something or needing something, do we then turn around and say, how do I bear that? Is that going to weigh me down? Is that going to hold me back? If I give to them, how much do I give to them? Do they deserve me? Do they deserve what I can give them? And if the roles were reversed, would they give me? Would they bear me? And we're doing all those calculations about our fellow human beings. And that's the second echa question that has to do with each other. When we turn to each other and we sense someone needs something, but then what enters our minds is, will they diminish me or will they make me grow? And we're back away from their need and we're back to me. How do I bear it? Should I bear it? And those become questions that lead us back to Jeremiah's echa of saying, you're wondering how society fell apart? Go check the other question. You'll figure it out. When people say, I can't bear you, I can't bear each other. Especially if I'm saying I have my own scars. I have my own vulnerabilities. I have my own weaknesses. You're just going to add. How am I supposed to bear that? When we look at Jeremiah's language, we understand he is talking about history. He's using the past tense. How did this happen? And if I take a step back into history with the how question, I can get caught there. How did it happen? I have no idea how it happened. There's layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of how it happened. I'm not there to solve it. I'm there to notice it. That's the impact of history. That's the impact of the past. Moses, however, frames it differently because his echa question very immediately switches to future tense. Not how did I bear them, how will I? How will I bear this? How will I carry them? I wasn't trained for this. I was trained for an empire. How do I bear them? How do I understand what they need? I never experienced that. How do I know what that means? How do I know that echa? When I sit with Jeremiah and I think about the past tense, how did this happen? I get caught in the world that was. I miss my party dresses and my crinolines. I miss my shiny shoes. I miss when I could go with my family and I could hear my crinoline rustling as we very quickly rushed to the airplane. No need to rush to the airplane. Airplanes used to wait for people. It's an old world, and I can get caught in it. But then immediately Moses moves us back and says, move that echa question to the future. How will I? How will I carry someone else? How will I bear them in the very literal means of it? Carry them. How do I teach myself to do that so that in fact I can move forward? The stuff in our heads will always churn. It'll always move. Our minds never rest. They're always active during the day and they're always active at night. Those are our dreams, those are our nightmares. They simply don't rest. That's the stuff in our heads. But Tisha B'Av tells us there are questions to be asked. There's focus that needs to be introduced. And our starting point is the word echa, how. We need to look at how things did happen so that we observe them. And then we immediately need to recognize Moses asked the same question and projected me forward with it. I then have to ask myself, how do I get everyone to feel connected? And then, how do we carry each other? I need both echas. Shabbat Shalom.